And in the end, perhaps the most haunting aspect of Tommy Chong's life is the enduring question of legacy. What does it mean to be remembered? To have brought joy to millions, to have shaped a culture, and yet to have walked through life bearing wounds invisible to the public eye. Tommy Chong's story forces us to consider the human cost behind artistry, the invisible struggles behind public personas, and the delicate balance between laughter and pain. It reminds us that the brightest stars often burn with a hidden intensity, and that even the most celebrated figures carry within them private battles that no audience can fully witness. As the smoke clears and the laughter fades, what remains is a man of immense creativity, stubborn resilience, and profound vulnerability. Tommy Chong's life, in all its highs and lows, reminds us that human existence is complex, layered, and often tragic. The laughter he inspired will live on, timeless and infectious, yet the man behind it continues to walk the quiet path of survival, reflection, and the enduring search for peace. In that, his story is both deeply human and hauntingly beautiful, a testament to the price of creativity, the power of resilience, and the tragic, compelling weight of a life fully lived. As their fame grew, cracks began to show. Creative tensions simmered beneath the humor. Chong, the man whose imagination fueled so much of their absurd brilliance, found himself increasingly at odds with Cheech Marin. What had once been effortless camaraderie turned into conflict over creative control, and the rift widened over the years. Fans saw the duo on stage, seemingly inseparable, unaware that behind the scenes there were arguments, resentment, and the heavy burden of trying to hold on to both friendship and a livelihood in a world that demanded constant innovation. The mid-1980s brought their split, a bitter end to an era of comedy that had once seemed invincible. For Chong, the aftermath was not just professional, but deeply personal. He felt the sting of being undervalued, of having the essence of his creativity questioned, and of watching a lifelong partnership fracture before his eyes. Loneliness crept back in. The old ghosts of his childhood revisited him. And yet, he kept moving forward, performing wherever he could, appearing in small roles, trying to rebuild a life that had been shaken to its core. Then, in the early 2000s, the world seemed to conspire against him once more. Tommy Chong, now in his mid-60s, became a target of a federal crackdown on drug paraphernalia. For selling bongs and pipes, for contributing to a culture that had long celebrated freedom and laughter, he was sentenced to 9 months in federal prison. The irony was bitter. The man who had given the world joy was now behind bars, separated from his family, stripped of dignity, and forced to confront the very institutions that had shaped his earliest pain. Yet even in this darkness, there was a glimmer of resilience. The public rallied, the Free Tommy Chong movement swelled, and through it all, he carried the weight of humiliation and injustice with a quiet, defiant dignity. Health struggles soon compounded the man's trials. In 2012, a diagnosis of prostate cancer shook him to his core. The laughter that had been his shield against life's cruelty was now insufficient against the cold reality of mortality. Through treatment, experimentation, and sheer will, Chong fought. Hemp oil, alternative therapies, and an indomitable spirit became his arsenal. And though he emerged from the battle alive, the scars remained, a reminder of life's fragility and the relentless cruelty of fate. Yet perhaps the most tragic aspect of Tommy Chong's story is the dichotomy between the public image and the private man. On screen, he was free, unburdened, anarchic. Off-screen, he was haunted, struggling with the fallout of broken partnerships, the weight of fame, and the echoes of a childhood marked by neglect. The man who once made millions laugh had spent decades laughing to keep from crying. Even as documentaries celebrated his genius, even as fans adored him, the shadow of personal tragedy lingered. A constant companion that no amount of humor could fully dispel. Behind the smiles and smoke, Tommy Chong's life was an ongoing battle between freedom and consequence, between creativity and chaos. The very culture he had helped define, the music, the films, the marijuana-fueled rebellion, became both his sanctuary and his prison. Fans adored the images of him laughing with Cheech Marin, the surreal adventures of hippie misfits, the comic absurdity that seemed to make the world lighter. But the reality was far heavier. Every joke he told, every skit he performed, carried a shadow of the boy who had been abandoned, of the man who had faced rejection, and of the human being who had spent decades negotiating between who he truly was and who the world wanted him to be. Even as his career wavered after the duo's split, Chong never fully stopped creating. Small acting roles, guest appearances on shows like That 70s Show, and cameo spots kept him visible, yet they never filled the void left by both the loss of his creative partnership and the years of institutionalized isolation from his youth. It was during these years that the full weight of his life's tragedies became apparent. A man who had once seemed larger than life, whose very name brought laughter, was quietly wrestling with his mortality, his failures, and the persistent feeling of being misunderstood. The federal prison sentence in 2003 marked a particularly cruel irony. Here was a man who had spent decades challenging societal norms, creating laughter from rebellion, and promoting a culture of freedom, now confined by the very society that had once celebrated him. Prison was not merely punishment. It was a mirror reflecting decades of unresolved pain. He experienced humiliation, loss of independence, and the bitter taste of public scrutiny. Yet, even within those cold walls, Chong displayed resilience, refusing to surrender his spirit entirely. Friends and fans rallied outside, forming the Free Tommy Chong campaign, a testament to the indelible impact of his work. And through it all, the man who had made so many forget their worries for a moment now had to confront his own. Chong's personal life, too, bore the scars of his turbulent existence. His relationships had been strained by both fame and addiction. The very lifestyle that had fueled his creativity, marijuana, experimentation, a bohemian disregard for convention, also carried consequences. Trust became difficult, love complicated, and stability fleeting. Yet in quiet moments, away from the spotlight, he wrestled with regret, reflection, and the longing for redemption. This was a man who had given so much laughter to the world, yet had so little solace for himself. The duality was cruel. The public adored him, while privately he battled the invisible wounds of his youth and career. Illness soon reminded him of life's fragility. In 2012, the diagnosis of prostate cancer arrived like an unwelcome shadow, demanding attention and resilience. It was a battle fought not just against the disease, but against the inevitability of mortality itself. Chong approached it with the same ingenuity that had guided his art, exploring hemp oil treatments, alternative therapies, and embracing the support of friends and loved ones. Through it, he survived, yet the confrontation with death left its mark, deepening his introspection and reinforcing the transient nature of fame, laughter, and life itself. Throughout these years, the world remembered him for his humor, his absurdity, and his partnership with Cheech. Yet the man behind the persona was more complicated. Every smile on screen was a delicate negotiation with pain, every improvised joke a way to keep shadows at bay. He had become an icon, yet remained vulnerable, human, haunted by both the joy he had created and the cost at which it had come. The laughter of millions could not shield him from the quiet, persistent ache of a life lived in extremes. A life of brilliance, chaos, loss, and survival. And there was Cheech. Their friendship, once unbreakable, had fractured under the pressures of fame, creative differences, and personal ambition. Fans often saw them reunited in interviews or documentaries, smiles on their faces, nostalgia in their eyes. But behind those smiles were layers of resentment, misunderstanding, and sorrow. Tommy Chong had poured his heart into their work, yet felt overshadowed, unappreciated, and in some ways abandoned. The man who had been the creative engine, the imaginative force, often found himself sidelined by circumstances beyond his control. Their story was not just about comedy, it was a story of friendship tested, of bonds stretched thin, and of the human cost of brilliance under pressure. Yet even amid these hardships, Chong remained a figure of resilience. He continued to create, to perform, to participate in documentaries, and to share his perspective on the culture he had helped shape. His humor persisted, though tinged with the gravity of experience. Every appearance, every interview, every performance carried the weight of his life's journey, laughter intertwined with pain, rebellion intertwined with consequence. He had survived poverty, abandonment, addiction, imprisonment, illness, and betrayal. Yet each survival carried a quiet tragedy, a reminder that the man behind the comedy had always been more than his public image. The later years of Chong's life brought a bittersweet reflection. He could see the impact of his work, the cultural shifts he had influenced, and the love of fans who celebrated him as a pioneer of comedy and cannabis culture. But he also bore the heavy knowledge of what he had sacrificed, the personal toll exacted by fame, and the private suffering that had accompanied decades of public adoration. Every award, every appearance, every moment of recognition carried with it the memory of pain, the echo of loneliness, and the shadow of a past that could never fully be escaped. Chong's legacy, then, is one of paradox, a man who made the world laugh while silently enduring the kind of trials most would never see, a life marked by brilliance and brilliance's inevitable cost. A story that is simultaneously celebratory and tragic. He became a symbol, not just of counterculture comedy, but of resilience, of the human ability to survive and create in the face of relentless adversity. And yet, beneath the smiles, the films, and the accolades, there remains the quiet truth that Tommy Chong's life has always been a testament to the thin line between laughter and sorrow, between fame and isolation, between freedom and consequence. Even as his career slowly regained momentum, the personal costs of his life weighed heavily. Tommy Chong had married, divorced, and remarried, and the impact of fame and turmoil left scars on his family life. He had children, some of whom struggled to navigate the shadow of a father whose public persona was larger than life. Love, trust, and connection were often tested by the demands of his career, the consequences of addiction, and the years of separation during both his imprisonment and personal battles. The laughter he shared with audiences was a stark contrast to the private conversations he could never have, the moments of absence he could never reclaim. Each reunion with family was tinged with the knowledge that time lost could never be recovered, and every gesture of affection carried the weight of past neglect, whether intentional or the result of circumstance. Chong's relationship with Cheech Marin, though strained for decades, eventually found moments of reconciliation. Public appearances, interviews, and even collaborative projects in later years allowed the two men to reflect on their shared history. Yet these reconciliations were not cures for the wounds inflicted by years of professional tension and personal resentment. Even as they laughed together on camera, there lingered a quiet awareness of the creative and emotional sacrifices each had made along the way. For Tommy, the journey had always been more than comedy. It was a path through survival, identity, and the fragile balance between artistic genius and personal destruction. Looking back over decades, one sees a life defined by extremes. Tommy Chong's journey took him from the cold orphanages of Calgary to the bright lights of Hollywood, from intimate pain of family estrangement to the public adoration of millions, from the isolation of prison cells to the warmth of fan support and cultural recognition. Every stage of this journey carries the duality of triumph and tragedy, a constant tension between what he achieved and what he endured. It is a story that defies simple celebration or lamentation, instead existing in a space where joy and sorrow are inextricably linked. And in the end, perhaps the most haunting aspect of Tommy Chong's life is the enduring question of legacy. What does it mean to be remembered? To have brought joy to millions, to have shaped a culture, and yet to have walked through life bearing wounds invisible to the public eye. Tommy Chong's story forces us to consider the human cost behind artistry, the invisible struggles behind public personas, and the delicate balance between laughter and pain. It reminds us that the brightest stars often burn with a hidden intensity, and that even the most celebrated figures carry within them private battles that no audience can fully witness. As the smoke clears and the laughter fades, what remains is a man of immense creativity, stubborn resilience, and profound vulnerability. Tommy Chong's life, in all its highs and lows, reminds us that human existence is complex, layered, and often tragic. The laughter he inspired will live on, timeless and infectious, yet the man behind it continues to walk the quiet path of survival, reflection, and the enduring search for peace. In that, his story is both deeply human and hauntingly beautiful, a testament to the price of creativity, the power of resilience, and the tragic, compelling weight of a life fully lived.